The video was 9 days old the night I finally sat down and watched it. And the thing that came out from under that cabin porch took 11 seconds to finish coming out. 9 days. 11 seconds. I have had 10 years to think about those two numbers, and they still will not lie flat in my head. It came out belly down, front legs first, hauling itself through a gap in the porch skirting that a raccoon would have thought twice about. And it kept coming, and it kept coming, and my hand was on the mouse and I could not make my hand move. Before we get into it, let me know where you're watching from, and if you've had an encounter like this. My name is Wayne Nelson. In October of 2016, I was a park and recreation ranger for the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, working out of Van Riper State Park in Champion, and one of the things on my list every year was Craig Lake. If you have never heard of it, that is the point of it. Craig Lake State Park sits northwest of Michigan on the Baraga and Marquette County line, and the department will tell you flat out it is the most remote park in the state system. That is not marketing. You turn off U.S. 41 a mile west of Michigamme and drive 8 miles of rock and washout and frost heave that will take the exhaust off a car and the fillings out of your teeth, and at the end there is a dirt lot big enough for 9 vehicles. That is the whole park. 8 miles of bad road, and then your boots. I hired on the summer I turned 22. I was a seasonal at Van Riper cutting grass and pumping vault toilets and telling people from Illinois that no, you cannot swim out to that island. And I stayed, and 30 years went by the way they do. By 2016, I knew that country the way you know the inside of your own mouth. There is a display off the parking lot at Van Riper about the moose lift. Panels, photographs, an antler under glass. In 1985, and again in '87, the department brought 59 moose down from Algonquin Provincial Park in Ontario, traded straight across for wild turkeys, hauled them 600 miles in crates, and turned them loose north of Michigamme, right where I am talking about. The herd came off those releases, and it ranges Marquette and Baraga and Iron counties now. I am telling you about the moose because of what happened to them. The 2 cabins there were built by Fred Miller, that is the Miller of Miller Brewing, who bought that country as a private camp and named 3 of the lakes after his kids: Craig, Claire, Teddy. He died in 1954, and the family sold to a timber outfit, and the state picked up the core of the estate in 1966. There is the lodge, which is the big one, sleeps 14, and there is the little one down the shore that everybody has always called the caretaker's cabin. 6 bunks, 1 room, a wood stove, a counter, a table, 4 chairs, and a covered porch off the front facing the water. No wire of any kind runs into that park. A hand pump and a vault toilet up the path. My job with those cabins was simple, and it was mine. Haul the firewood in, keep the pump primed, check the roofs and the stovepipe and the door hardware, open them in May and close them in October and write it down. 4 or 5 times a season I would drive the 8 miles in, load the side-by-side at the lot, and run the old grade down to the water. That grade is not on the park map, and it is not for the public. It is a 2-track the department has kept open since before I was born, so a man can get a trailer of split maple down there without carrying it on his back. The rest of the world walks, which means that for 30 years, on the days I have trouble with, I was the only human being inside of 11 miles of that lake. The first thing that went wrong was the gray jays. And I need to explain why that mattered, because if you are not from up here, it is going to sound like nothing at all. We have gray jays in the Michigamme Highlands, Canada jays, whiskey jacks, camp robbers, take your pick, boreal birds. And one of the reasons a man with binoculars will drive 8 miles of rock road to stand in a bog. They are also the least afraid animal in North America. You sit down on a cabin step with a sandwich, and a gray jay will be on the porch rail before you get the wrapper off. They will take bread out of your fingers. For 30 years I ate my lunch on the step of that little cabin. And for 30 years, I had company. Then in the spring of 2015, I sat down on the step with a sandwich and nothing came. I want to be honest about how that landed on me, which is barely. I noticed it about like you notice a light out in a room you are walking through, and got up and primed the pump, but it kept not happening. All that summer, into the fall. I would come down the grade with a load of maple and work 4 hours, and there would not be a J on that rail. And then I would drive up to the lodge, 200 yards up the shore, and sit on the steps, and inside of a minute one would drop onto the rail and look at me sideways. 200 yards. That is the whole distance between the two buildings. 200 yards up the shore they were exactly what they had always been, and down at the little cabin they would not come in. A man can talk himself past one bird. He cannot talk himself past the same bird making the same choice 100 times running.
Quick thing before we move on. I have this book coming out. It's called The Dogman Codex. It's a compilation of all my research and findings. Been working on it for a long time. So if you want to check that out, links down below. Now let's get you back to the video.
The second thing was the smell. And here I have to own up to something, because I had been smelling it for 2 years before I ever once thought about it as anything. The caretaker's cabin sits on piers, field stone and mortar with poured concrete where the stone gave out, which is how you built in this country in the 1930s. And that leaves a crawl underneath, 18 inches at the high end, better than 2 feet where the ground falls toward the water. Somewhere along the line, the department put board skirting around the base and a panel of lattice on the lakeside to let it breathe. And every old cabin in the U.P. smells a little. Mice get under there and die. A skunk will winter in a crawl. A red squirrel will haul 40 pounds of cone scale into a joist bay and rot it out. So when I would open that cabin in May and catch a smell coming up out of the floor, I told myself, that is the crawl, and prop the door and let it air. Except this was not that smell. I have crawled under buildings with dead things in them my whole working life, and dead is sweet and thin and it gives out. This was thick, wet dog, and old meat. And under both of those, a heavy sour musk like the bottom of a den. It came up through the floorboards on a warm afternoon and faded when the wind came off the lake and was back inside of 10 minutes when the wind quit. 2 years I smelled that and filed it under crawl space. That is not a man being stupid. That is what a person does. You have a box for everything, and the thing goes in the box, and you go on with your day. The third thing was the quills, and that is where the box broke. In August of 2016, I went in to swap out a length of stovepipe on the little cabin, and I found the lattice panel on the lakeside pushed out of its frame and lying flat in the ferns. Not chewed. Pushed. The frame it sat in was a piece of 1x2 nailed to the pier, and the nails had pulled straight out of the wood, all 4 of them, still in the lattice, still bright. Nails pull out from the direction the force came from. Those nails came out toward the lake, which meant the push came from under the building. I stood there and I knew that, and I decided I did not know it, and I got a hammer and nailed the panel back and wrote in the log that the skirting had come loose and been repaired. Skirting loose on southwest elevation. Repaired. That is the exact sentence. But before I nailed it, I did what anybody does. I got down on my knees, and I put a light in the hole. The ground under that cabin was packed. That is the first thing I saw and the first thing I did not want. Not dug. Nothing like the little scooped hollow a coon makes. Packed flat and shiny, the way a 2-track gets, the way the dirt gets in front of a gate where the cattle stand. It ran from the lattice hole under the joists toward the porch end, and it was worn to a polish. Something had been going in and out of that hole on the same line long enough to make a road out of it, and the whole 18 inches of that crawl, from the lattice back into the dark where my light gave out, was quills. I am going to tell you what I thought first, and I need you to understand I meant it. Porcupine quills under a building in the U.P. is not a mystery. It is Tuesday. Porcupines chew the daylights out of cabins for the salt in the wood, and they den under them. And we have fishers, and a fisher is the one animal in North America that has the whole porcupine business figured out. The department turned them loose in the western U.P. out of Minnesota in the early 60s, and they have knocked the porcupine numbers down ever since. A fisher will go at a porcupine's face, over and over. Half an hour if it takes that. And when the porcupine quits, it flips it and eats it from the belly out. There are fishers walking around right now with 100 quills in them, perfectly healthy. So I said fisher, and I felt better for about 4 seconds. Then I started actually looking at what was in front of me. A fisher eats where it kills. It does not haul a full-grown porcupine anywhere, and a fisher is 9 pounds and 8 inches at the shoulder. And it does not need 18 inches of clearance, and it does not wear erode into hardpack. But the thing that took the 4 seconds away from me was the count. You get a couple of porcupines in a crawl over a few years. You get quills, some, a drift of them in a corner. What was under that cabin was not some. My light went back, and it did not stop. Hundreds and hundreds of them, gray and white and pale yellow, in loose piles and in mats where the dirt had come over them and packed them down like straw in a barn floor. Old ones going brown underneath, and fresh ones on top. That is not a season. That is not 5 seasons. That is a long time. That is something that has been eating porcupines under a state cabin for longer than I had been, driving down to that cabin. And then I saw the ones in the wood. The floor joists over my head were rough-sawn 6-inch stock, hard as a bank vault after 80 years. And there were quills driven up into them, not laying on them, in them, broken off flush and standing out an inch. 3 and 4 at a time in clusters, the length of the bay. Like something had been under there on its back with its arms up, pulling them out of its own hide and grinding them into the wood over its face. I turned the light off. I did not back out and I did not yell. I reached up with my thumb and turned my own light off, on purpose, in the dark, under that building, because I did not want to see any more of it, and I lay there in the dirt in the black for I do not know how long. And the smell came down on me, and it was not the crawl space, and it never had been. Then I got out and nailed the panel on and wrote the sentence in the log and drove the grade out with the trailer bouncing empty behind me. And I did not stop the machine one time to look behind me. Here is what I want you to understand about that hour. Nothing with a name went through my head. What went through my head was that there was an animal I could not account for living under a building the department rents to the public. And it had been there since before my daughter was born, and in the fall we put families in that cabin. That is what made me get the camera. Not fear, liability. I have a logbook and a supervisor and a chain. And what I had was a big undocumented predator under a rental unit, and there is no box in the system for that. But there is a box for bear. The other 2 things happened that same August, close enough together that I have never been able to get them into an order that makes sense. The moose went first. You have to understand what moose are in that park. They are the reason people know the name Craig Lake. There is a bay on the west end that runs back into a black spruce bog with a slough in it, and in 30 years I never went in there in July or August and failed to see a moose. Not once. Cow and calf in the shallows. A bull standing in water to his brisket with his ears going. In 2016 there was nothing in that bay. Not a moose, not a track, not a bed, not a wallow, not a browse line, not a pile of pellets. The pond lily was untouched, which, if you know, moose is like walking into a bakery at closing time and finding the shelves full. I flagged it. I wrote it up to the wildlife biologist out of the Marquette field office, a woman named Kelly Griffin, who is good at her job and who has done nothing wrong in this story. She wrote back the same day and gave me a perfectly good answer. The aerial survey flies every other January over the core range, and the numbers had been flat a long while, and moose move, and animals shift with browse and water and bugs, and one bay going empty for one season in a range of 1,400 square miles is a data point and not a trend. Every word of that is true. If I had been sitting at her desk with her numbers in front of me, I would have written me the same email. Then the wolves. They came back on their own in the 80s, walking in off Minnesota and Wisconsin and Ontario, and by 2016 there were better than 600 of them up here in 120-odd packs, and the department runs a track survey every other winter and collars animals and knows where the territories sit. That is a map in an office in Marquette. There has been a pack on that country as long as I have had the job. I have logged their tracks on the grade in April mud 50 times and heard them off the ridge more September nights than I can count. That fall I did not cut a wolf track in that park, not one. I went in 5 times and I looked, because by then I was looking. In April, I ran the whole grade at the right time in the right mud, and there was nothing. And I got another perfectly good answer. Density had come down in parts of the West, U.P. And everybody knew why. We had brutal winters in 2013 and 14 and 15. The deer took it in the teeth. And where deer go, the wolves go. A pack-shifting range out there in 2016 is the least surprising thing in the world. So there it is. Every fact I had, somebody with a better education than mine had a boring answer for. And every boring answer was correct. And I still could not make myself walk to that cabin without checking the wind first. The man who finally said a true thing to me was Gene Mackey, and he said it at a woodpile behind the shop at Van Riper on the last Saturday in August. Mackey, like about half of Baraga County. Gene was 68 and he had been a wildlife technician for the department a long time before he took his pension. And he was on the ground crew for the moose lift in 85 and again in 87, which, in this end of the state, is roughly like saying you played in the Super Bowl. Every August he split cabin wood behind the shop because he could not stand to be in a house. We had a couple of cords of maple down and his shirt was off and his suspenders were hanging and he was 68 and out working me. And I said, with no run-up at all, "Gene, how long has there been something living under the little cabin?" He set them all down. He did not say what. He did not say, "What do you mean?" He set the mall head down on the block and put both hands on the handle and looked out at the highway for a while. And then he said, "You found the quills." That is the first thing out of his mouth. "You found the quills." I sat down on the block I had been splitting on and my legs did that on their own. That is what he said. That is the first thing out of his mouth. "You found the quills." He told me Alvin Pelto used to run the wood down to those cabins before I ever got hired, and 1991 was the last year Alvin did it. Alvin did not quit the department. Alvin quit that run. He went to the supervisor and said, "Put me on anything else. Put me on the toilets. Put me on the beach. I am not driving that grade anymore." And the supervisor put him on anything else and never asked him one question. Gene said that right there is the part to pay attention to. Not that Alvin quit. That nobody asked. Up here, that is a thing you do not do to a man. Then I made the mistake that everybody makes. I gave it the name off the radio. Out loud. At a woodpile. In daylight. In front of a man I respected. Gene laughed. Not a nice laugh. He said, "You are talking about the song." Gene laughed. Not a nice laugh. He said, "You are talking about the song." And that is when I found out he knew the whole thing better than I did. He said there was a disc jockey at the station in Traverse City who wrote himself a song in 1987 and played it on the 1st of April as a joke. Made it up out of his own head. Put it in a logging camp in Wexford County 100 years before and had the thing standing up and screaming and coming back every 10 years on the sevens. It was a prank. The man has said so 100 times since. Gene said the joke is not the part that matters. What matters is what happened after he played it. The phone lit up. Farmers, truck drivers, a deputy down in Lake County, people who had been carrying something for 30 years and heard a song on the radio and finally had a door to put it through. He said, "You tell me how a fella makes a thing up out of nothing on April Fools, and inside of a week his phone is full of people who are not laughing." Then he said, "That song is a Traverse City thing, and the Lower Peninsula can have it. What is up the Peshakee has been up the Peshakee since before anybody put a road in there. And it never needed a song, and it never needed a name, and the men who cut that pine off in the 90s knew what they knew, and went home to Finland or went in the ground." I asked him what it was. He picked them all back up. He said, "Wayne, everything you have got a name for. You have got a name for, because it has been shot and skinned and put on a table and measured, and the day this thing is on a table, you can call it whatever you want. Until then, a name is just a thing you say so you can sleep. Then he said the sentence I have carried for 10 years. He said, "Do not put a camera on it." Then he said the sentence I have carried for 10 years. He said, "Do not put a camera on it." He said, "You have got the look of a man who is about to prove something. And to prove something, you have to go stand where it is and leave something of yours behind while you do it. Whatever is under there has been under there since Alvin Pelto was young, and in all that time it has never come out and taken a family off that porch, and you might ask yourself why, and what you are about to change." I bought the camera 9 days later. I bought it with my own money because there was no line item for it, and I did not want a purchase order with my name on it explaining what I was doing. It was a covert, black plastic body about the size of a paperback, 16 megapixel, no-glow infrared, 40 diodes, 100-foot flash range, and it would shoot video, which is why I wanted it. 20-second clips. I put it up on the 9th of September. I strapped it to a red pine 30 feet off the lakeside of the little cabin, 4 feet up, and put it square on the base of that building. Not on a trail, not on a scrape, on the skirting. I framed it so the whole run of board and the lattice panel and the front corner of the porch were in the picture. And then I did a thing I have thought about every week since. I got up on the porch and walked the length of it to be sure the camera was reading motion at that distance, and it fired. I stood on those boards to test my camera. Then I did not go back for 9 days. I went in on the 18th of September, a Sunday, and I got to the little cabin at about 10:15 in the morning. It was a good day. Blue, 48 degrees, no wind, the maples starting to go on the far shore. And I came down the grade and shut the machine off and walked up to that cabin the same as I had 1,000 times. I checked the door. I went around the back. The panel was tight, and the nails were in it. And then I got up on the porch and stood there with my hands on the rail and looked out at Craig Lake for a minute, because that is what a man does when he has driven 8 miles of rock and 2 of grade, and he is standing on a porch on a lake with 6 islands in it, and not one other human being for 11 miles. I would guess 3 minutes. Then I got down and pulled the card. I had 112 miles of driving between me and my kitchen table, and I did not look at that card once. The answer is boring. I was tired, and it was Sunday, and I figured I had bear pictures. Michelle had supper on, and Megan had a thing about a group project, and my dog Gus wanted out. And I ate, and let the dog out and let the dog back in, and it was after 9 at night before I put the card in the laptop at the kitchen table. There were 388 files. Most of it was nothing. That is what a camera on a building gets you. Rain, grass moving, a red squirrel 140 times, 2 deer at the corner, a fisher. And I laughed out loud when I saw it, because there it was, my fisher. 40 seconds of it going along the base of the skirting at 9 at night on the 12th, and it was 8 pounds and it did not go under. I scrolled for an hour. It is the dullest work there is. Click. 20 seconds. Nothing. Click. Then I opened file number 361. 3:07 in the morning on the 14th of September. The picture came up gray and flat the way no-glow infrared does. The boards of the skirting bright, the ferns black. The corner of the porch cutting across the top left, and for 2 full seconds there was nothing in the frame at all. Then the boards moved. Not the whole panel. One board, low, near the porch corner, swung out on a nail like a cat door, and a black wedge of shadow opened behind it. And out of that wedge came something long and pale and thin, and it laid itself flat on the ground. That was a hand. I did not know it was a hand for another 6 seconds. On the screen, it was a rake. 5 long pale things fanned out in the dirt with the infrared, making them shine like bone. And the fingers were not the same length the way a coon's are. And there were claws set out ahead of them, and the whole thing was bigger across than my 2 hands laid side by side. Then the second one came out and sat down beside it, and then it started to pull. You have watched a dog come out from under a porch. A dog scrabbles. A dog is in a hurry, and its back end is working, and the whole thing takes a second, and it is a comedy. This did not scrabble. It got its 2 hands set in the dirt out in front of it and pulled itself out of that hole the way a man pulls himself out of a culvert, hand over hand, an inch, and then another inch. And it was slow, and it was silent, and I sat at my own kitchen table with my dog asleep behind me and watched it come out of the ground. The forearms came first, and they were as long as my legs, and the fur on them was dark and matted, flat and wet-looking. And it was crawling with little bright lines where the infrared caught it. Dozens of them, all up the outside of both forearms, laying at every angle, catching the light like frost on a windshield. And I did not know what I was looking at for another 4 days. Then the shoulders. And the shoulders would not fit. I have gone frame by frame on that. It came to the shoulders and it stopped and turned its whole body a few degrees onto one side, in the dirt, on purpose, and worked itself through sideways, one shoulder at a time, and I could see the boards of that skirting flex out and come back. That is when the size of it landed on me, because that opening is not 18 inches high, and whatever was coming through had a shoulder wider than a man's chest. Then the head came clear. I am going to slow down here because this is the part I owe you. It came out long and low, and it did not look up. It stayed down with its chin 2 inches off the ground, and it held there. And the head was 1.5 feet from the back of the skull to the tip of the nose. The muzzle was long and narrow, and came to a point, and it was a dog's muzzle, in the same way that a wolf is a dog, which is to say, it is the same shape and nothing else about it is the same. The ears were up and set high and far back, and they were moving, not twitching, turning, one and then the other, sweeping the dark, the way a listening animal does when it is not looking yet. And there were more of those bright lines in its jaw, along the side of the muzzle and up under the eye, in it, standing up out of the fur. It laid there in the dirt with its chin down for 4 seconds by the counter on the screen, and it listened to a lake at 3 a.m, and my whole life, up until that Sunday night, was on the other side of those 4 seconds. Then it got its hands under it, and it stood up. It did not rise up. Rise is a word for a thing you want to watch. It gathered. Everything long about it came in toward the middle at once. The elbows folding back the wrong way. The hind legs coming up under it bent at an angle. No dog's leg bends at. And it went from lying down to standing on 2 feet in less time than it takes to say it, and its head went out of the top of the frame. That camera was 4 feet up a red pine, 30 feet out, aimed at the base of a building. It stood there in my kitchen at 9:40 at night, filling the left half of a gray picture, chest and gut, and those 2 arms hanging past where a knee ought to be. And the top of it was gone, above the lens, and I remember thinking with complete calm, the way a man thinks when the machinery has already come apart, that the camera was set at 4 feet. Then it turned its head down and looked at it. You have to understand that a no-glow camera does not glow. That is the whole product. No red ring, no click a person would hear, nothing to see. 40 diodes throwing light that is not light. Deer walk past those things and never know. In 9 days, that camera had caught a fisher and 2 whitetails and a squirrel 140 times, and none of them ever looked at it. The head came down into the frame 18 inches from the lens, and it filled the screen. And the eyes threw the infrared back at me, flat and white and empty. 2 coins with no bottom to them, and it looked into that camera for 6 seconds. 6. I have counted it more times than I am going to admit to. It was not startled. It did not sniff, and it did not bear anything, and it did not do one single thing an animal does. It put its face in front of that lens the way you would put your face in front of a thing you had found in your own house. And it looked, and it was working out what it had. Then the clip ran out. 20 seconds is 20 seconds. The picture went black and the file ended with that face in it. And the laptop went right on to the next thumbnail, and my kitchen was very quiet, and the clock on the stove said 9:41, and my daughter was doing homework 20 feet away with her earbuds in. I did not open the next file for maybe 10 minutes. Then I opened it, because that is what you do. 3:07 and 41 seconds. The camera had refired the instant the first clip closed, which is what they do, and the frame was empty. Boards, ferns, the porch corner, 20 seconds of a lake in the dark. It looked at my camera for 6 seconds, and then it was gone out of a 30-foot frame inside of half a second. And it did not knock the camera down, and it did not chew it. and it did not swat it off the tree. It had a hand that could have taken that camera off that pine like you take an apple off a branch. It looked at it and left it there, nothing for 4 days. Squirrel, rain, squirrel, grass, deer. On the 17th, squirrel, then file 387, 4:19 in the morning. The 18th of September, 6 hours before I parked the machine. It came in from the right this time, on 2 legs, and all I got was the bottom 2/3 because of where I had aimed the thing. Gut and hips and those hind legs bent backward, and the arms swinging past the knee, and it crossed that frame in 4 steps, and each step came down flat and easy. And it never looked at the tree the camera was on, because it already knew what was on that tree and had decided the tree did not matter. At the corner of the porch it went down, hands first, then the shoulders. And it worked its way in the same as it had worked its way out. Sideways, one shoulder and then the other. And the last thing in the frame was the back legs folding under and going in after it. And the board swung shut on its nail, 4:19 in the morning. And then I opened file 388, and I watched a 52-year-old man in a gray uniform shirt come around the corner of that cabin at 10:15 in the morning, with a clipboard under his arm. He checks the door. He goes around the back. He comes back and he crouches down at the lattice panel, and he puts 2 fingers on it and he pushes, testing it. The way you do. And he nods to himself. And he stands up, and then he steps up onto the porch, and he puts his hands on the rail, and he looks out at the water. I watched myself stand on that porch for 3 minutes and 11 seconds. I am not going to try to make that into a sentence with any art in it. There is a man in a gray shirt on a porch, and he is enjoying his morning, and there is a floor under his boots, and 18 inches of packed dirt under that floor. And the arithmetic is the arithmetic. It went under at 4:19. The card ended at 10:20 when I opened the case with my own hands. There was no clip of it coming out. 6 hours between 4:19 and 10:15, and a working camera pointed at the only hole in that skirting, and it caught a squirrel that morning. At 6:02, it caught a squirrel, so we know the camera was awake. It did not come out. I ran it again looking for the way out. I thought, there is another hole. There is no far side. That building has skirting on 4 elevations, and I had nailed the only loose panel back on 3 weeks before and put my hands on it at 10:16, and it was tight. It was under me. It was under me while I checked a door. It was under me while I pushed on a lattice panel with 2 fingers 8 inches from its face. It was under me for 3 minutes and 11 seconds while I stood on a porch in the sun and thought about lunch, and it laid there in the dark and did not do one thing. And then I got in a machine and drove away. And it stayed. The last file on that card is a black screen because the camera was in my hand, which means that when I went to bed at 11 o'clock that night, with my wife asleep next to me and my daughter down the hall, it was still under there. Nothing on this earth was going to tell me otherwise, because there was no picture of it leaving. Michelle got up at some point and found me at the table at 2 in the morning with the laptop shut and my hands flat on the wood. And she asked me what was wrong, and I said the water main at the beach house. That was the first lie. There were going to be a lot of them. I took it to Kelly Griffin on the 21st. I did not walk in and say I have a monster. I am not an idiot, and I had a pension. I walked in and said, I have got video of a large mammal denning under a rental cabin at Craig Lake, and I need to know what I am looking at before I put families in it next spring. I had it queued to file 361. She watched about 9 seconds of it. The 2 hands come out, and it starts to pull. And she said, "Oh, that is a bear coming out of a den." And she leaned back. I said, "Keep watching." She kept watching about 4 more seconds, which took it to where it stops and turns onto its side to get the shoulder through. And her phone went off. And she picked it up and looked at it. And she said, "They will do that. They will get themselves into anything." She had one under a shed in Republic that summer that had taken the floor out. She was already turned back to her desk. And I stood there in a field office in Marquette with the thing on the screen behind her, and I did not say the next sentence. It was not fear of being laughed at. Kelly Griffin would not have laughed at me. It was that I had 4 years to my 30 and out. And the next sentence in that room no matter how I said it, was the sentence they would remember about me. It gets forwarded. It gets a nickname. It gets played at the district meeting. And then in April, I am the guy with the video. And Craig Lake goes to somebody who does not know that grade in the mud. So I said, yeah, probably a bear. And she said, you might want to get a trap in there before you open in May. And I said, good idea. And I drove home. She was not wrong about the first 9 seconds. On a small screen, in the middle of a Wednesday, with a phone going off. It is a bear coming out of a den. It is exactly a bear. I said bear the first time I saw the boards move, and I had the whole thing in front of me and no phone. That is how it gets to keep living under a state cabin for 80 years. It does not need anybody to lie. It only needs everybody to be busy. The report I filed says large mammal, unidentified. Probable black bear. Denning under structure. Recommend removal prior to spring opening. That report is real and it is on a server somewhere with my name at the bottom of it. And it is the most dishonest thing I have ever written, and every word in it is defensible. I could not shoot it. I know how that lands on somebody who does not live here. I had a 30-30 behind the seat, like every man in this county. But in December of 2014, a federal judge threw out the delisting and put gray wolves in Michigan back on the endangered list. And they were still on it in 2016, listed endangered, not threatened, which is the top shelf. Take of any kind is federal. So you tell me. You are a state employee in a state uniform in a state park, and you put a round into a large dark canid at night, and it goes into the brush, and you cannot produce a body. You have ended your career, and you have a federal charge, and you have a headline with the department's name in it, and if by some miracle you do produce a body, the whole world comes to Baraga County, and it is my name on it. The one exception is defense of human life. That is real, and I knew it. And the trouble with defense of human life is that it is a thing you find out about afterward, from a chair, with a lawyer. So a gun did not make me safer. It made me slower. The arithmetic came out the same every night, which is that the rifle in my truck was not a tool. It was a decision I had already made not to make. It started coming out to meet me in October. The first time was the 2nd of October, in the daylight, and it was nothing. And it was the worst nothing of my life. I came out of the grade at 4 in the afternoon and loaded the machine and got in my truck. And there, in the dust of the lot, running from the tree line to the driver's door and back, was a line of tracks. I put a tape on one because I am who I am. 14¼ inches, heel to the front of the claw mark. The claws were out ahead of the toes and they had dug, and they were two-legged the whole way, in and out, one print in front of the other, and the stride at a walk was better than 5 feet. They came to my door. They stopped, and there was a scuff there, a half-turn, where the weight came around. And I have read enough sign to read a thing standing still. And that thing had stood at my door long enough to be standing. There was nothing on the truck. No mark. No hair. There was nothing on the truck. No mark. No hair. Nothing. It was learning what I was. That is the whole of it. I had put a machine on a tree to look at it, and it had looked back, and then it had come out to look at my truck. We had 5 acres outside Michigami on the Peshakee side, 1.5 miles from where Craig Lake Road leaves the highway. That is a fact I had never thought about one time in 20 years and could not stop thinking about after that October. Of all the houses in the Upper Peninsula, mine was the one closest to the mouth of that road. Gus was a yellow lab and he was 9 and he had never had a nerve in his body. That dog would swim out to a loon. He slept under our deck every summer in the cool dirt, and you had to go out with a biscuit and negotiate. The second week of October, he quit going under the deck. He would go to the bottom step and stop. Not bark, just stop, with his weight back on his hind legs and his head low and his lips moving a little, looking at the gap between the deck boards and the ground, and if you walked him at it, he would put his shoulder into your leg and turn you. I gave that dog 4 days. 4 days of watching him do that, and then on a Saturday, I got the good flashlight, and I told my wife I was checking for a skunk, and I got down on my belly in my own yard. Our deck was a pressure-treated thing my father-in-law and I put up ourselves. 2x8 joists, 16 on center, 2 feet of clearance at the house end. I had been under there 50 times chasing a wasp nest or a hose. The dirt in the middle bay was packed, same as the cabin, not dug, polished, and when I rolled onto my back and put the light straight up, there were 4 gouges in the underside of the joist over my face, running with the grain, deep enough to lay a finger in, and the wood in them was pale and green and fresh. Pressure-treated does not weather to that color in a month. And they were not scratches from a thing rubbing past. They were 4 parallel lines drawn by 4 points on one hand. I want to tell you I got out of there. I did not, right away. I laid on my back under my own house, with the light on those 4 lines, and put my hand next to them to get the spread. And my hand did not come close. And I thought about my daughter, who used to play under that deck when she was 6 with a plastic tea set, and about how many nights I had sat over that spot in a lawn chair with a beer. I never told Michelle. In 30 years of marriage, that is the only real thing I ever kept, and I kept it. And I am not going to dress it up as protecting her, because I have had 10 years to be honest, and it was not that. It was that if I said it out loud in my own kitchen, it was going to be in the house with us. And as long as I did not say it, it was only outside. What I did instead was I got small and mean about the little things. I put a deadbolt on a door that had never had one. I told Megan I did not want her out past dark, and when she asked why, I told her there had been a bear in the yard, and I skirted the deck. I closed the whole thing in tight with treated 1x6, 4 screws in every board. And when I was done, I stood back and understood what I had actually built, which was a nice new dark place with only one way in. I took every board back off the next weekend. Gus would not go under it either way. I went to Gene Mackey in the 3rd week of October, and I told him about the tracks in the lot, and I told him about my joist. He did not say, "I told you so," and I have loved him for that ever since. He listened to the whole thing, standing in his driveway with his hands in his pockets, and when I got done he said, all right. Then he said, "Alvin Pelto is still in Lance, but I am going to save you the drive, because Alvin has not put a sentence together in 4 years, and the last time Gene sat with him, Alvin was in a chair by a window, and he asked twice whether the wood was in. He said, that is all Alvin has got left. Whether the wood is in." Then he said the thing I go back to. He said, "Wayne, you have been driving in there 4 times a year for 30 years, and it is known where you are the whole time, and it never come down that road once, not to your lot, not to your truck, not to your house. And then you put a camera on it, and inside of a month, it has been under your deck." He said, "You did not find it. It found out about you." I asked him what I was supposed to do. He said, "You finish out the season, and then you get off that run, same as Alvin did. And you do not tell anybody why, same as Alvin did. And in about 10 years, some other poor fella is going to be standing where you are standing, and you are going to be the old man in the driveway who will not go with him." I had one more trip in. The cabin's close on the 15th of October, and after the 1st of November, the road is done. Nobody maintains it. It is snowmobile country until May. Somebody has to go in and pull the canoes and drain the pump and shut the stoves down. And that somebody was me. And the last Saturday of that October was the last day it was going to be possible. I could have handed it off. I could have called Dave Turner, my supervisor, and told him I was sick, and he would have sent 2 seasonals in with a list. I did not hand it off because I was not going to send 2 20-year-olds down that grade. Everything else about that day I have argued with myself over. That one thing I never have. The 29th of October, 2016. I left the house at 6 in the morning, and the forecast was rain going over to snow after dark with an inch or 2, which, in this county, is not a forecast. That is a Tuesday. I had the machine on the trailer and the chainsaw and my lunch and a 30-30 behind the seat that I had already decided I was never going to touch. I worked until 4. I pulled 2 canoes and life jackets, drained the pump, got the caps off both stovepipes, hung the shutters, swept both cabins. I did all of it at the lodge first and left the little cabin for last because I am a coward and I wanted the light. The whole time I worked, I did not go near that skirting and I stayed off that porch except to lock the door, and it snowed on me from 2 o'clock on. Not the pretty kind. The kind that comes at you sideways off Superior and gets in your collar. It was better than 4 inches by the time I got to the lot at 5 and full dark, which up here on the west end of the Eastern time zone in late October is not a surprise. It goes at 6:30 and does not come back until after 8 in the morning. I got the machine loaded and I got the straps on and I got out of there at 20 after 5, and I made it exactly 1 mile. There is a spot on Craig Lake Road about a mile off the lot where the grade runs along a cut with a washout on the right that they have been patching my whole career, and in 4 inches of fresh over old rock the crown of that road is a guess. I came off the crown. The right rear went off the shoulder into that washout, and the frame came down on rock, and everything stopped. 1 second I was driving, and the next I was a man in a truck at an angle. I dug for an hour and a half. I had the shovel and the good jack and the mats, and I had done this before, and I know when a truck is coming out, and this one was not. She was hung on the frame with the right rear in the hole and nothing under that tire but air. There is no service on that road. There never has been. You do not check your phone on Craig Lake Road any more than you check the sky for a taxi. And then I got out and I looked at my tailpipe, and my tailpipe was down in that washout, packed in mud and slush to the elbow. So I got in the cab and ran the heater and did the math. And then I got out and looked at my tailpipe, and my tailpipe was down in that washout, packed in mud and slush to the elbow. You do not run an engine with the pipe in the ground. I have been to that call. I know a family it happened to. That is the last stupid thing a man does, and it is quiet, and it does not hurt, and you go to sleep. So I shut her off, and the heat was gone out of that cab in 11 minutes, and I sat in the dark in a metal box at 21 degrees, soaked to the thigh from pulling canoes out of a lake all day. 7 miles down that road to 41. In the dark, in 4 inches and coming, with a knee that had already told me twice that day what it thought. Or 1 mile back to the lot and 2 down the grade to a 1-room cabin with a stove I had cleaned that afternoon and a cord and a half of split maple stacked under the eave by my own hands. I sat there a good 20 minutes and I understood the joke completely. The only warm thing inside of 11 miles was sitting on top of it. 3 miles to fire, or 7 miles to a highway with maybe 4 cars on it in a storm on a Saturday night. And me wet. You can dress it up any way you want. There was not a choice. There was arithmetic, and I did it. And the arithmetic said cabin. I took the rifle. Of course I took the rifle. And I had my hand on that gun for the next 11 hours, and it did not do one thing for me except give my hands a job. I walked out of that truck at 7:45 at night. The first mile back to the lot was cold and stupid and hard. The second mile, on the grade, going down toward the water, with the timber closing over the top of me, was when I smelled it. It came down the slope on my right on the moving air, and it was the smell out of that floor, the wet dog and the old meat and the sour under it. And it was not faint, and it was not a hint. It was close, and I had a flashlight in one hand and a rifle in the other, and I stopped in the middle of a 2-track at 8:30 at night and stood there. And then I made myself walk. There was no bravery in it. I was not going back to the truck, and I could not stand in a road. So I walked, and it came with me the whole rest of that grade, and I never saw it once. It was up the slope at first, 20 or 30 yards off my right shoulder in the timber, and you cannot hide a thing that size in 4 inches of new snow, and it was not trying. Step, pause, step. It matched me. When I went, it went. When I stopped to get my light up, it stopped, and the wood stopped with it. And the only sound in the world was the snow ticking on my hood. The pause was the part that did me. An animal moving through timber does not pause between steps. A deer moves in bursts. A bear crashes. Wolves are quiet, and they are gone. This put 1 foot down and it waited, and then it put the next one down. And the waiting is a decision, and a thing that is deciding where to put its foot is a thing that is thinking about you. About halfway down, it crossed the grade behind me. I heard it come out of the timber onto the road, because snow over frozen two-track does not sound like duff. I heard it come down at my back, and I heard the claws, and that is the sound I still get, the click of claws on frozen gravel through 4 inches of powder, and it stayed back there, and it did not close, and it walked me the rest of the way in. I did not run and I did not turn around. Not because Jean had told me something or because I had figured out something clever about predators. I did not turn around because I did not want to know how close it was. The lake came up on my left and I could hear the little waves working the rocks, and then the cabin was there, black against the snow, and I got the padlock off with hands that would not do what I asked them, and I got in, and I put the bar across. The bar on that door is a 2x4 in 2 brackets. I want to be honest about what that is worth. It is worth nothing. It would keep a person out. That is what it is for. I got the stove going. It took me 3 tries because my hands were done, and then it caught, and the light came up in that room orange and moving, and I got my boots and my pants off and hung them on the rail and sat on a bunk in my long johns with a wool blanket around me, and for about 4 minutes I was the happiest man in North America, because cold was the only thing that had ever seriously tried to kill me. Then the floor took the weight. I did not hear a step. The boards under the bunk went down and came back up. One long, slow flex like a dock when somebody walks out on it, and the stove door rattled in its latch, and every bit of warmth I had went out of me through the top of my head. It had come in under the building while I was getting the fire lit. I got up on the bunk. That is the whole tactical genius I brought to bear that night. And it took me about 2 seconds to understand how funny it was. A man in his underwear standing on a bunk with a rifle, 6 feet of air over him, and 14 inches of floor joist under him. There is no going up in a fight like that. There is a floor and a thing under it. It moved around under there for 11 hours, and it never once tried to come through. That is the thing I have never been able to make anybody feel. Everybody wants the part where it comes through the door. It never came through the door. It got under that floor at about 11 o'clock at night and stayed there while I stood on a bunk with a lever gun in my hands. And what it did was live. It laid down. I heard it lay down. I heard the whole length of it come down into that packed dirt in the bay under the stove where the warm was going through. And it settled. And it breathed. That is the sound I would take back if I could take one back. Not a growl, not a snarl. Breathing. Slow, big, wet, 1.5 feet under the boards, the way a dog breathes in front of a fire. It was warming itself. On my stove. It laid down under my fire, and it went to sleep in the only warm dirt in Baraga County. And it let me stand up there all night and feed the thing that was heating it. Around 1 in the morning it moved, and I heard it work at itself. That scratching, and then a snap, and then another snap. Small and dry, and I did not understand it until 3 weeks later at my own kitchen table, when I made myself watch 361 all the way through and looked at those bright lines on the forearms with a fresh set of eyes. Quills. It was pulling quills. Under my floor, in the warm, at 1 in the morning, doing the same thing that made those clusters in the joist that 80 years of somebody's never looked at. I got down off the bunk at some point because a man cannot stand for 11 hours. I sat with my back to the wall and my feet up off the floor like a kid. And I fed that stove 1 stick at a time because the one thing I was not going to do was let it get cold. And I listened to it sleep under me. At about 3:30 it came out. I heard it get up. I heard the dirt. I heard it go along the bay toward the front. And I heard the board swing on its nail. And then the porch took the weight. The whole cabin knew it. That porch is joisted off the same sill, and when it came up on those boards, the whole building leaned a 1/2 inch and came back. And I heard it stand up out there. And then I heard it walk, slow, down the length of my porch and back. And it stopped at the door. There is a gap under that door because it is a cabin door in a building that has been settling since 1930-something. And there was a lamp on the table, and the fire in the stove, and the light under that door went out. It stood there, and I sat on a bunk 4 feet from it with my feet off the floor and the rifle across my knees and looked at a black line under a door. and I did not move, and it did not move. And neither one of us made a sound, and I would put that at 4 minutes. And Michelle says, I could not know that. And she is right. And I am telling you anyway. Then the light came back under the door. The boards let go one at a time, unhurried, down the length of that porch, and it went off the end, and at the corner it went down, and the board swung on its nail, and the floor under my feet took the weight, and it went back under and laid back down by the stove. It got light at 10 after 8. I had been watching that window for 2 hours, and I had already worked out the whole problem. The only way out of that cabin is the door, and the only thing on the other side of the door is the porch. And the porch is 14 inches of pine over 18 inches of dirt. And it was lying in that dirt. To leave, I had to walk across it. I got dressed. My pants were dry and stiff, and my boots were still wet inside, and I laced them and let the fire go down. Because there was one more thing I understood by then, which is that if I fed that stove, I was going to feed it forever. At about 8:30, I took the bar off. I opened that door, and the snow had quit, and there was maybe 6 inches on everything, and it was so bright it hurt. And there was not one mark on that porch. Not one. 6 inches of clean snow on boards a thing had walked the length of at 3:30 in the morning, and the whole night had filled itself in. And if I had come down that grade at 8:30 for the first time, I would have said, what a beautiful morning. That is what I need you to take out of this more than anything else. It fills in. Every single thing about that cabin fills in. And then I stepped out on it. You want to know what it is like to put your whole weight down on a board with a thing under it. It is not a scream. Nobody screams. I stood in that doorway and put my right boot down, about 8 inches out, and put weight on it. Slow, the way you go out on ice. And the board took it and did not say a word. And then I brought the other one, and then I went, and it was 5 steps. I got about 50 feet down toward the water before I looked back. The cabin sat there in the snow, with its shutters on, and its door hanging open where I had left it, and a thin gray line coming off the pipe, and the lattice panel on the lake side was a black rectangle with white on the sill of it. And I could not see anything in it, and I knew exactly where it was. That is the whole story. Right there. Not the video. That. Standing in 6 inches of snow at 8:45 in the morning, looking at a black rectangle in the side of a state cabin and knowing, and being 50 feet away, and it letting me be 50 feet away. I walked 3 miles and got to the lot, and there were 2 sets of headlights coming up the road at me through the trees, and it was Dave Turner in the park truck with a chain in the bed and a young fellow from Ishpeming I had hired in June. Michelle had called Dave at 10 the night before. He sat in his kitchen until light, because you do not drive Craig Lake Road at night in a storm to look for a man who is either fine or gone. I told them I got hung up and holed up in the cabin. That is true. I have never said one more word than that to anybody in the department. Ever. They pulled my truck out of that washout in 40 minutes and we went home. I got off the Craig Lake run. I did it in February. At the district meeting, in the least interesting way I could figure out. I said the road was rougher than it had been, and my knee was what it was, and it was time to get somebody younger down that grade. Nobody blinked. Dave gave it to the fella from Ishpeming, and I trained him on the pump and the stoves and the grade in April. In the mud, in the daylight, and I stood in that yard while he learned it. And I did not go up on that porch, and he did not ask me why. I never went back after that April. 4 years later, I put my 30 in, and I took my pension. Here is what it cost, since you have come this far. I never told my wife. 10 years. She knows there is something, and she quit asking about 8 years ago. And there is a room in our marriage with the door shut, and I put it there. I never told my daughter. She is 25 and in Green Bay, and she thinks her old man got strange about the dark for a while and then got over it. And I did not get over it. I just got quiet, which is a different thing. Gus lived until he was 13, and he never went under that deck again, and he never went out that door after dark on his own again. He was a good dog, and he made a decision about the world at 9 years old, and he never revised it. Gene Mackey passed in the spring of 2021. Alvin Pelto had died the year before, and I never made that drive, and I do not regret it, because Gene was right. and the only thing left in that man was whether the wood was in, and I have the card. It is in a fire safe in my shop, and no, I am not going to put it on the internet, and I have made my peace with what that means about my credibility. Here is why. That is a state camera position on state land at a facility that rents to the public, and there are people whose job it is to answer for that building. Kelly Griffin is still doing hers, and she is good at it. Dave Turner has grandkids. And the day that file goes up, 400 people with lights and packs walk 8 miles down Craig Lake Road and 2 down a grade, and they will be standing on that porch taking pictures of each other. You can call that a convenient excuse. Some nights I do. I sleep all right most of the year. It is October that gets me, late October, when the wind comes around and the first real snow is in it. And I will come up out of sleep and find I have already got my feet up off the mattress, tucked, the way I sat on that bunk, before I am even awake enough to know why. So here is the only thing I have got to give you. If you ever find yourself in the woods, and the ground under something goes packed and shiny, and there is a road worn into it, do not put your light in there. Nail the board back on and drive home and never go back and let whatever it is have that building. And if you ever have to stand on a floor with a thing under it, understand what you are actually being told. It could have come up through those boards any time in 11 hours. It is not a door, and it is not a wall, and it is not a 2x4 in 2 brackets that stopped it. It laid down under my fire and warmed itself, and got up and walked my porch and stood at my door and went back and laid down. And in the morning, it let me walk out across it. It let me. That is the whole thing. 10 years, and that is the only sentence I have. It is still under there. I have got no picture of it leaving, and I never will. And every May, somebody unlocks that door and sweeps that floor and props it open to air out the crawlspace smell. And every summer, a family from downstate drives 8 miles of rock road and walks 2 miles in with a cooler and sits on that porch at night with the lake going and has the best week of their lives. And I hope they always do. I hope nobody ever gets a camera on it again. I did, once. And it looked back.